Badwater 135 is a unique race, and not just because of the extreme heat, but also the lack of aid stations. As you would have seen in my film, your crew needs to be with you the entire time. And in addition to gear to help deal with the heat, there are a lot of safety requirements as well. I'm going to start with apparel, then I'll talk about shoes, my watch, and some other sensors, my headlamp, some of the required safety gear, before finally talking about nutrition and hydration, followed by a little bit on logistics and some final thoughts about the race itself. All in this episode of The Mudroom. First, some disclosures. Most of the gear that I used was provided by the sponsors of the films, with a few exceptions, and I will provide affiliate links in the description. They don't cost you anything more, but they do help out the channel. And of course, be sure to watch the film first if you haven't already. So starting from the top, you would have seen me wearing this throughout the night and early morning, and then again on the second evening. It's lightweight, it's breathable, and really comfortable. I then changed into a Badwater branded hat that I picked up at the Race Expo, actually right before the race during check-in, and it's made by a company called Boko Gear. And the key feature here is a neck covering that buttons up at the front so that it doesn't blow around in the wind. And it's also got pockets all along the top here for ice. I used this during the heat of the day and it worked amazingly well, but function over fashion for this one for sure. My ice bandana was from a brand called East Peak. I talked about this in a recent video about some of my favorite new gear of 2025. And as I said in that video, I'd noticed Killian and a few other athletes wearing this at Western States right before Badwater, and I managed to get my hands on one just in time. This allowed Audrey to easily refill the zippered pocket without me having to take it off, and then the ice would slowly melt and drip through the holes underneath to keep my shirt wet. The rest of my apparel was from Path Projects, one of the sponsors of the film. My shirt was the Path Wadi tee, really comfortable and durable, paired with the Moab arm sleeves that I helped develop. I've talked about these a few times. They have taped, stitchless seams, full coverage for the hands, and the killer feature is the window for your watch. And of course, we were able to get them wet with ice cold water and stuff ice down the sleeves to slowly melt in between stops. And for bottoms, I wore the Sykes PX shorts with the 7-inch inseam paired with the Lynx PD baseliner from Path. And this combination is the best way that I've found to prevent chafing. The socks I wore were the Joiner ankle sock from Path Projects. I normally prefer a long sock for the trails, and I was actually told I should wear longer socks to help block the heat coming off the road, but I think that the breathability of these shorter socks made them a better choice. For shoes, I ran in the R135 from Mount to Coast, and I talked about this as well in that other video about my new favorite gear from last season. And these are essentially a modified version of the R1, which is a shoe designed specifically for ultra distances on pavement. The R135 is just a little bit more breathable in the upper, and in addition to some special branding here with the Badwater logo, it has a reflective coating on the outsole for safety during the race on the highway, and some blue tones along the edges and the laces. They both feature a dual lacing system. So you can see here a regular lace along the top and then a quick lace on the bottom. The idea being that you can quickly reach down and loosen your shoe if needed as your foot begins to swell. And that was something that I had to do during Badwater as my foot started to swell in the heat. These are very comfortable and they fit my foot just perfectly. I didn't have a single blister or any foot problems after 135 miles on the pavement without changing my shoes once. And the headlamp I used was this little guy. It's the HL18RT from Phoenix. This is the version 2, a newer one that just recently came out with USB fast charging. It's got a lock on the side, a little meter on the front here with these lights so you can see how well it's charged. It's got the BOA fit on the strap. It's actually dual direction, so you can loosen it and tighten it and just tweak it exactly how you want it, which is nice. I didn't need anything too bright. There was no navigation, no technical terrain, so it was as much for visibility for other vehicles as for my own, lighting up just a little bit in front of me on the road. So I wanted to find a balance between something that was lightweight, but still, fairly somewhat bright and long lasting. So this one worked out really well. Okay, let's talk watches and sensors. And the watch that I used was my trusty Coros Vertix 2S. And this was probably overkill for Badwater actually, since I didn't need navigation, nor did I need more than 48 hours of battery. This will do up to 118 hours, I believe. But I did appreciate having a larger display so that I could see data from my various sensors. And that included the Coros FootPod, which I used to track ambient temperature. This is a little bit more reliable than the sensor built into the watch, which would be affected by your skin temperature. And that would also give me more accurate cadence information as well. And I was able to also pair it to my Core 2 thermal sensor. Now, this isn't quite as accurate as a sensor that you might ingest, but that would have probably passed through my system before the race was over, and I would have then had to retrieve it, which would have been difficult from a porta potty. Trust me though, we considered that as well. But the Core 2 is the next best thing in terms of accuracy. I had this mounted for the first 100 miles or so of the race to a chest-based heart rate monitor, an old Garmin one that I had from years ago, since Coros doesn't make a chest strap. And mounting the Core sensor sort of under your armpit on a chest strap is supposed to be best. But as you would have seen in the film, I eventually had to ditch the chest strap because of chafing in favor of the Coros armband instead. And in hindsight, I probably should have just started with this setup to begin with. This is what I used for most of my heat training. Most of which, as you would have seen in the film as well, I did in a heat suit provided by Core. Now, the real benefit of this sensor isn't just for monitoring your body temperature during a race. It's for tracking your heat adaptation during your training as well. And the app that comes with the sensor measures this over time, and it gives you a score to see how adapted you are. You can even manually add in your passive sessions done in a sauna, since that's too warm to wear a watch or any other device with a lithium battery, and it'll factor that into your score as well. Now, I was definitely not sufficiently heat adapted for Badwater, despite all of the heat training that I did, both passive in the sauna and active on the treadmill. But this is where I could improve if I ever was to do the race again, and the sensor and the app would allow me to measure and compare my progress. Okay, let's move on to some of the required safety gear. And let me just say that this is one of the more complicated aspects of the race because there was quite a bit of stuff that I had to source from a few different places. This included blinky lights. You needed at least 8 of these for the runner and crew. I ordered a bunch of cheap ones from Amazon, plus I had a few higher quality ones from Phoenix as well. We needed OSHA Class 3 garments for all support crew to wear at all times along the course. And there were very specific requirements for what kind of shirt you can and can't use. It couldn't just be a regular construction safety vest, which is often just Class 2, I believe, so it was easier to just order these from the race itself. I think those were about $55 US each, so a couple $100 right there. We also needed special reflective vests for the runner and pacer at night. I found these Nathan ones. I think they were about $75 for 2, and we needed at least 8 personal portable toilets like these Biffy bags, which we were able to order from the race to pick up at check-in. I think they were about $33 US for 8. And then of course there was all the coolers and containers for ice, food, and fluids. Fortunately, Floris and Derek had both driven there, so they were able to each bring a cooler from home along with chairs and a few other larger items, so we only had to buy one more cooler along with a big water container and some other supplies. Then of course there was all the food that we bought beforehand, along with food, bottled water, and ice that we bought during the race. We probably spent over $100 on ice alone. So you can see where these mobile aid station supplies could reach $1,000 pretty easily if you were starting from scratch. And all of this had to fit in a vehicle that was no larger than a minivan. We rented one for the week from the airport. You are not allowed to use RVs because space is really limited for pulling over in a lot of spots along the highway, and this is very tightly regulated. Although some people do use cars, especially if they only have a 3-person crew. On that note, you need at least 2 people with a valid driver's license in the vehicle at all times, but no more than 4 people on your crew. And in our case, that included Derek, who was really only there to film, so our crew was essentially 3 people. And you could only ever have 2 people cross over the road at once, so you may have noticed Derek filming me from the other side of the road quite a bit. And that's because Floris and Audrey had typically already crossed the road to support me. So we rarely had Paul cross over unless he was pacing, because anything medical related could be handled right at the van. And of course, there was an entire guidebook breaking down every section of the race with rules on where you can and can't pull over. Now, last but not least, let's talk about nutrition and hydration. I was aiming for an average of at least 1 liter of fluids per hour, along with 1 gram of sodium per liter to balance out that fluid intake, along with other electrolytes, and at least 350 calories per hour. And this would be mainly carbohydrates, along with a bit of protein, around 9 grams per hour from the NAC energy drink mix, which was my primary fuel source. I was alternating between 3 different flavors to help prevent flavor fatigue, along with a few waffles and gels. I supplemented this with electrolyte pills. I use a brand called Salt Stick, and some regular food like watermelon, pickles, and some other snacks. And for caffeine, I drank the occasional cold can of Coca-Cola, as you would have seen in the film, along with caffeine pills, around 200 milligrams every 4 hours just throughout the night. And in hindsight, we probably could have increased this quite a bit, especially on the second night, to prevent that fatigue that I was feeling. Now, I mostly just hand-bombed my fluids in this insulated Solomon-branded flask from Hydro Pack, and that helped to keep it from getting too hot. We did have an old handheld that I used as well at night, but I was going through so many bottles that it just seemed easier for me to just hold the flask and sort of try to force myself to drink it as quickly as I could until I could just fold it up or maybe shove it in my pocket. It just kept things a lot simpler. And this really was one of the biggest challenges in the race, just the sheer amount of fluid that I was having to force myself to take in. Like I said, we were aiming for around 1 liter per hour, but this got up to more than 2 liters at some points, which is a lot of fluid hour after hour. I mentioned this in the film at one point, that I was starting to get sick of the physical act of drinking. And that's something that I was warned that would happen. But I think my nutrition plan worked out pretty well. And I think that we pretty much nailed that balance of water and electrolytes. One of my goals in choosing this race was to be able to isolate the variable of heat, both when it comes to heat management and fluid intake. That's really what this race comes down to, since otherwise it's really just a long run on the road. But it essentially takes that variable of heat to the extreme. And we've now developed a system for heat management that can easily scale down to other hot races like Western States or my upcoming race at the Cocodona 250. It really feels like we've got that aspect figured out. Now, the main thing I could have improved on, though, as I mentioned, was my heat training. We had the theory and a good protocol in place, but I just don't think that I did nearly enough of it. And mainly, I would have liked to have spent time, maybe a few weeks, down in the climate, training on or near the course itself. This is what Scott Jurek talks about having done years ago, basically just sleeping in his car with no air conditioning and training right there in the desert in lead up to the race. But as I alluded to in the film, we ended up closing on a new condo right before the race. So we were having to deal with securing financing and insurance, along with, of course, the move itself. And at the same time, I was having to find and lease a studio space and to move all my equipment here and get insurance for this, along with a quick trip down to Western States to volunteer on the media team right before as well. So it was really a crazy couple of weeks. So all things considered, I think it came together pretty well. Now, one final thought. I'd asked my friend Simon, who had run Badwater, if he'd run it again. And he said that he would if someone was to call him up and say that they had a crew and pacers all lined up. But he could never ask his wife Nora to do it again. And now I know exactly what he's talking about. This race was so demanding for my entire crew, but for Audrey in particular. There really is no chance for a break, whereas in a typical 200-miler, crew might have hours to kill in between aid stations where they can rest and eat and resupply in towns. But in Badwater, your crew is with you the entire time. This was one of the first big races I ever heard about when I started running. Over time, though, it felt like it drifted a little bit out of the spotlight, but I never stopped being curious about it. And it seemed that the crew perspective, what it actually takes behind the scenes, hadn't really been shown properly before. So we went there to experience it firsthand, and I'm really proud of how we captured it. And if this film breathed a little new life into the race for you, or at least sparked some curiosity, then I think that means we did our job. Now I'm curious, after seeing the film and hearing what goes into the gear, the logistics, and essentially building your own mobile aid stations, is this something that you'd ever consider running? Or maybe crewing or pacing? Let me know in the comments below.